this had a different name yesterday. Now it has a name Hodgepodge, because if you tried to find all this information, I mean, we could cover the whole stage with books and stuff that's around, and then you have to figure out what you need out of it. And it's not easy to do. This opening picture, though, is the water, Kalamazoo, up, you can see the Butler at the top, above the, who's doing that? Oh, good, ooh. Okay, and then if you come down the river is all the mills, the lumber mills. If you see little, looks like puffs of dust, that's the mills making noise. I mean, this doesn't sound fun at all, you know. But that is back in the 1900s, right before 1900, before the pavilion even came in. Okay, let's move on now. I wanted you to see the kind of things I worked with. I don't know if you ever worked with original sources. Oh, it's so fun. But you know, someone hasn't opened these books for 100 years, you know? But the problems are, we have scrapbooks like this everywhere. But God knows what that refers to, what year or anything. Because it's not marked. So if you do anything, mark them, sign your name. And then this one, this is the back of one of the scrapbooks. They're just, somebody gave up, I guess. And so that's just there. So we have some jobs to do as members here. And then the last one, this is one of my favorites. It's the actual minutes. And evidently something was written wrong. So they wrote it on another piece of paper and they pinned it. I think that's ingenious, you know? I would do that. And we'll go out and show you a couple different objects. This is probably, I'd say, the pride of the Women's Club. May Frances Heath, in case you have ever heard of her before, my favorite, put this together for the first 60 years of the Women's Club. In it is a picture of each president and their notebook, that the directory from that year, so you know all the programs. And then you find little tidbits in there and you go, oh, I know what they're talking about. You'll hear a few of those. And then when you open the page, that's just one of them. We also have Helen in the back here, who's the great-granddaughter of our 4th president. So, which is cool. We didn't know that. We just found that out, which is exciting. Okay. Well, go ahead. I want to show you. These are a lot of the original sources we used. On the right is the original minutes. You'll see how awful they look. There's the deed for the Owl House, and of course our commercial records and other original information. And of course then we grew up and found all these books. On Saugatuck. We are very fortunate. We have such a selection of history books here. And doing this, I came up on one I hadn't seen before even. And I had a whole article on Tallmadge in it. I mean, Tallmadge. And it was exciting to find. Okay, well then we're gonna go on, and these pictures, well, they'll probably tell you. This is the old harbor. That was the only way into Saugatuck, to the Lake Michigan up the old harbor. And that's logs, planked really, wood, ready to be shipped over to Chicago. And you see the lighthouse up there. So I was just going to show you some pictures so you might help center what we're doing. And the next one is Fishtown, which sat just beside it. And that's where the fishermen and their wives and their children and everybody lived. Now if you walk down that way at all, the only way they could get to town, really, was to walk and then cross the river somewhere. So it wasn't an easy life, it was hard times. This one I wanted you to see because behind the buggy and the horse is our Breuckman house. It's now the Owl House. Okay. And if you look next to it, Judy Hallisey, wherever you are, that's the house that came up from Singapore. They brought up from Singapore. It looks a lot better now. And this is a scene that, as you know, we go through history with the different periods. This is the lumbering period, and I've never seen this picture before. That's all lumber lined up on over there, yeah. Just waiting to be shipped down the river, or it's been through the mill, looks like. I think it's been through the mill. But anyway, that's our lumbering. And the next one represents shipbuilding. We build big things here. It's astounding what we did here. But I don't want to live there. After the shipbuilding, we went on with apples and peaches. And I'm sure you've heard the terrible stories of the peach decimation of the product, gone. Just one bad frost took everything. So from a crop to no crop. But we still have our apples. Chain ferry, 1900. It's not quite like we have today, as you can see. You can see the horse. I think that's fascinating. I don't know. And you can see, the fun thing is, the far left up there, you can see the motel across the river. That's original, and you can see some of those homes along the river are still there too. So, you see here one of the ships coming up, 1908, coming up. I assume it's heading for the pavilion or somewhere downtown. Once they opened up the Kalamazoo Cut, it's called, the big ships could come straight in instead of angling around. And here are our best friends all dressed up in hot clothes in the summer climbing Mount Baldy. I don't know, that's a vacation, they say.
In 1905.
1905. They loved it. And that's when the boats leaving, going out the Kalamazoo Channel. And then, of course, the old harbor has sand. The sand is filled in, and you don't even see it now. This picture is, I think, from 1910. And I wanted you to see that because, again, you can see the pavilion up there in the corner. It's just in. It opened in 1910. And if you come downriver, there's the lumber. There's the mills still. They're still cutting up lumber. They're making terrible noises. You can see the gunk floating around from the sawmill. And you can also see, if you come down just a little closer, that's the building that they call it the roller rink. That's where they roller skated all the time. But anyway, it's a little different scene now. So in the beginning of Saugatuck history, the Women's Club history, was Mrs. Hattie Bird. She lived, let me see where she's going. She lived up on Allegan Street. She called her friends, she walked and gave out notes, her friends, and asked if they wouldn't come join her. Other hill women, okay? Only from the hill, not from the flats. Well, you think about coming up Allegan Hill in the mud. Remember these sidewalks, you know? Yeah. So anyway, that's what they did. She invited them, and 7 showed up at her house. And he had a wonderful time. Her husband was the druggist downtown. He was at that job over 60 years. And it's right where our current drugstore is. So that's Hattie Bird, and she's considered the mother of the Women's Club. And she shows up. Here's the house. The one on the right is what the house looks like now. It has never looked better. That's the Palazzolo Zerfus house on Allegan, and the Frolic is the one before. Looked more like what the Birds lived in. I can tell you about the first meeting. In the first meeting, these 7 women decided, yeah, there should be a women's club. They didn't name it or anything, but they went ahead in this meeting of 7, chose the motto and the colors, and worked on a constitution. When they left there, they decided they would open up the membership to others later after the Constitution had been approved. So the next week, these women are smart. They are smart women. Anyway, at the next meeting, they brought up the Constitution with the extra people. We had, another 6 there, I think, at the time. And of course, wouldn't you just approve a Constitution if they've done all the work, you know? So they now had a Constitution, and they had a president who was Mrs. Hodge. She was the first one elected. Now that's Mrs. Hodge. As you can see, it's just a snapshot. I've yet to find many of our pictures are portraits, but this is just a snapshot. But she was one of these women that had traveled. Her husband was, she was a teacher. He was like a school superintendent. He ended up in Mexico being a counselor person in the government. And then they both went somewhere else on that kind of thing. And then they ended up living in Washington for that. And I mean, fabulous life. And they ended up here, which is really nice. And they lived in Chicago both ways. And she was chosen president because she had already been involved in 4 women's clubs in Illinois. And she knew how to handle it. And she did. She did a wonderful job. And she was really only, a very short time as president, because it started after Thanksgiving in 2004, and then she served through 2005, and then she was gone. But she did some cool things. At the meeting, they decided they would, Mrs. Reuben Tacken was elected as secretary. Now, Tacken is my street where I live. Yeah. That was fun. And he is a banker. He was the banker down at Food Growers. It was fun figuring these people out. They had to have something going on, So anyway, she was the ideal leader, and they thought that she would do a good job too. Mrs. Bird, who you saw back there, was elected treasurer because she was good with little nitty things. So, okay. So after the election, we have the, this is the Constitution they signed. Can you read it? I figured out if I looked like this and kind of read from the side, I could figure it out. But that's how that book is, and I brought it along. And then the next page, this is my favorite. The women who were the charter members signed the Constitution in this book, and they signed both their husbands' initials, and then they signed again with their first name. I was so proud of those ladies. Because in all of the minutes and things, you don't see that. You see the husband's initials usually. So we're working on that, and we're working on that with our past presidents even. We're trying to figure out what the first names are too. That's one of our projects, yeah. And Mrs. Coates is the second. Where Constitution, hang on. Yep, that's where I am. Good. The second, this is the woman. I love the histories. Her husband was a sailor. She and he went to Saugatuck schools, off to Canada, farming, lost everything. They thought they could go to Canada, and I have grandparents that did that too, because it was cheap to farm. Well, it wasn't so good. Anyway, she and her husband, which I think is very cool, they sang music too. They loved music. And so they practiced music, and they were quite excellent. When you're in a committee in 1904, you have to listen to these committees. They call it the Sick Committee. I like that one. A Park Committee. And the programs were a lot of reading. So anyway, sometimes they came in with their books and sat and they read. Sometimes they read to each other. Sometimes someone would come prepared to sing a song or teach music. They were really, really trying to help each other improve, and each of them had a specialty, and they shared that, which is marvelous. In 1906, they moved from homes. They went from home to home for the first few years. In 1906, they moved to the Congregational Church, and that is the land above, up the hill. Yeah. Well, their property there was given to them by Mr. Henry Breuckman, who built the owl house out front. Okay. It was his property, and the Congregational Church asked him, and he said, "We'll show you. You can have it free." So that's how the Congregational Church ended up there. And so we met up there for a few years, and then we moved on. You're not welcome a long time. when you're taking 60 people around different places to work, to be and then in and out. I'm going to go with the state librarian here. One of the things that the women had decided on, they were going to have a women's club and they were going to have a library. This is a list of the first library they had. All the books were donated by the members. I don't know, can you read some of those? Some fascinating. Thomas Jefferson. Quite a bit of fiction too. But anyway, so they put those all together. Now what do you do with them when you don't have a place, a home, So May Frances Heath became the librarian, and she, all the books went to her house, and the women would trade off, and so it was really much more of a club. This is Mrs. Alex Thompson. Yeah, she was married to a minister, one daughter, and her theme of her program was women as rulers. Yeah, the year, all the programs were dedicated to women poets, authors, pathfinders, what Shakespeare says about women. And they ranged from American artists on, but that was a great program. And every year, each president had their own influence on the program, so it was always interesting to see what they did. In 1914, the women had decided they needed to find, they wanted to build a clubhouse because they were rather tired of being up and downstairs and on and on. And they had moved on to Bird Center. Anybody know where that is? Some of you do. It's on, as you come into Saugatuck, as you drive into Saugatuck, the one on the left there, you'll see those homes, they're still there. And then they had the waterfront too. So Mrs. Bird let them use that as a place to have meetings too. But by 1910, they were really tall and tired. And so they went to the hardware store, John Koning's hardware store. You'll know it as the Wilkins hardware store, and now you'll know it as the Butler pantry. Yeah. If you look on the right, there's a door, and that leads upstairs to one big room. So he let them rent that for $90 a year. Now, there was no air. And by the time the women got up there, dressed in their full attire, I think that's when they stopped the meeting in the summer, quite honestly. But anyway, it was at least they had a place, and they could decorate it and make it their own. So they were quite happy there, and they were there for like 14 years, I think. And they talked about the summer women, and I know we have, as a club, have talked about the summer women. And some do come to our programs, which we love. But they decided that we're going to invite the strangers among us, they called them. Strangers among us. And surprise, but the Women's Club discovered there were some pretty neat strangers. And matter of fact, there was one, there were like 16 women that came, and they actually put on programs for the Women's Club to make money. And lectures in there kind of were out about evolution of women. Mrs. Dailey was the president from 13 to 14. She did great things, and she moved them forward just like they wanted to do. But when she was done with her job, they decided, you see, in 1914, that it was really serious. We need to get money together to save it and to build a club. This lady, fool that she was, said, "Oh, I'll do that." For the next 20 years, she did it. Wow. I mean, we should have a statue in here or something to that end. The money, they divided the group, and this is interesting too. They took the club members, put them in 10 groups, and they were each their own little money-making group. So they would do things to make money. And then every May, the last meeting of their year, They'd all get together, and the whole year long, they're yakking at each other. Oh, I got more money than I got more, all this stuff, all the stuff we do. And so May was always the reckoning, and it was pretty sad, guys. I mean, having money in those days was not easy. They went through the Depression, they went through a war, and they still kept saving money. You'll appreciate this too. The first group to help the women was Mr. J. Myers. Do you remember him? Ferryman. He took people back and forth forever. It was his job. And he was a fabulous man too. And if you go across on the ferry now, there's a bench over there, a dedicated bench that was made by Mr. Tallmadge, one of the Oxbow etchers he was. Anyway, he gave his wife $25 so she could do a play, either the club on the stage and do a play and make money. That was pretty cool. But you'll see if, this is a page of one of the scrapbooks. She did a card party in the public library. I don't know, it was not easy to raise money then. They have, one time, they raised $946 one season. And Mrs. Susan Arnold, have you heard of the Arnold line at the Mackinac Island? That's who she was married to. Anyway, she was so excited they got so close, she gave them the rest of the money to make $5,000, which was sweet. And of course, the ladies were thrilled. Between 1904 and 1938, when this comes to a close, there were 18 presidents. Some served 2 terms, and most served 1. I told you about May, though. This is May Frances Heath in her middle years. We have pictures of her as a young woman, too. She was president 14 to 15. And what you have read of May Frances Heath over the years is true. The woman never went to bed, I'm sure. She always had, I'd say 10 projects going at once, worked full time. She wrote, she sang, she composed poetry. She just did everything. And later on, you'll see where in 1930, she becomes the chairwoman for their big centennial celebration. The village council actually appointed her because she already had this reputation for getting it done. And so her term was very interesting. It really moved us along, I think. These are the commandments that we found. Yeah, well, maybe we don't have to read them. You can read them yourself. I'm telling you, everything I've read, I would have loved to have been involved with these women, And I'm sure a number of you would too. They were just something else. And thank goodness, because look what we have. This is, on the left, is the original village hall. At that time, it was the fire barn, and there were stairs up to the upstairs. Wasn't very pretty. And then on the right is one of Peggy Boyce's pictures that she watercolor paint. Well, the women went to the village council and said, we want you to open your doors here so that all the tourists have a place to go to the bathroom. They weren't shy, these women. And you can guess what the council said. And I can tell you, they had every right to say that. So, anyway, here comes the women's club saying, well, you've got to open your restrooms. We got to do something. There's people, And so they convinced them, well, after the council said no, the women said, well, if we can find a place, if you can find a place, and you will pay for it, and you will pay for an attendant, go right ahead. The Methodist Church of Alfred, their basement. So the women's club hired somebody, got them all set up, and that was the village restrooms. The next one is about another little story. It was the women went before the council. They really had a nice reputation and nice working relationship with the council. They would go down and they would support, they really believed in supporting the government, and they did, and it did pay off. The women finally went to the council again and said, we really want to build a club. We don't have enough money yet, but we are going to. Can we build it down on the village square? And you should all say, no. They said, yeah. You know, this is back in 1930. And when they said yes, they were thrilled. And if the next picture you'll see that spot? That's where it would have been. It's right next to Santa Fe. And it faced right across from the Heath fountain. And the Heath fountain, I found out, I didn't know. The Heath fountain is there because May Frances Heath had a hard time getting her husband home after work and was drinking. So she had him install a drinking fountain there so he could stop and rest. But anyway, this is a small town, isn't it? This is where it would have been. Well, it didn't get that far because the committee, the more they thought, then they asked them how much money they'd want to put in on it too. I was proud of them. Anyway, it did not work. And so they were brokenhearted, of course. But they went right back to fundraising. And they sent a very nice thank you note to them, thanking all the officers. Thank you for listening to us, da-da-da-da. And so we're going to take a break here and go backwards in time. We have to go back to the 1860 picture of the horse and buggy. Behind it was the Breuckman house. Anyway, this is Minnie Breuckman. Her parents came from Germany. And he was a mill. He worked with mills. And they lost their first child, fell in over one of the mills and died. Anyway, they ended up in Saugatuck, built this lovely building, the owl house out here. And the wife said, thanks, I'm never leaving. And she didn't. She stayed there the rest of her life and died in that house. The husband went on to Chicago because that was his work. And this is her older. Susan Arnold, I was saying, is married to the man who ran the shipping line up at Mackinac Island, and a lot of property and lots of stuff. And Minnie was always, they spent every summer up there. But they were always working. They weren't playing, they were working. They worked at the post office there, and then they came back here, and so they were quite well off. Her sister, older sister Susan, died first, and the cemetery, if you go out to where the Butler Monument is in the cemetery, right next to it is the Breuckman stones. She died in 34. She couldn't figure out what to do. She was the only one left in her family. She had family distant, and all she could think of was something would happen to her house. She didn't want it torn down. She wanted it known as the Breuckman Corners. So she said, well, she didn't. She did it herself and then told everybody. Her will, three women of the Women's Club knew about this. She chose 3 women as her directors, trustees, and told them, you have to incorporate first this building to be the front, to be legal for the Women's Club. It wasn't incorporated. So by law, you had to do that. And so these 3 women did that. The 3 women all went to school with her back in Saugatuck High School earlier in the century. And she had complete faith in them, which is amazing. And she left $5,000, which in those days was not bad, either to work, fix the house, or whatever. And $3,000 had to stay in the bank all the time so that there was money. You couldn't use it. She left the house and this land and money. And so we finally came up with enough money to do something, which is wonderful. And one of the first things that happened, all of those books that were in May Frances' house, they were moved in, and it became the public library then. And they actually had somebody there to help people. So that was the first thing they did. And then it's Tallmadge and Fred Fursman, Oxbow people. Those 2 men are the ones responsible for getting the land for Oxbow, paying for the land, setting it all up. And of course, Mr. Tallmadge is an etcher. He took a class out there. fell in love with the area, and came out of Chicago. He had his own cottage. If you've toured out Oxbow, he had his own cottage, and it's gorgeous. And he helped design Williamsburg, this man. He wrote 3 books on architecture that were very successful, and he ends up in Saugatuck, and he loves it. He found that special love, and here he is. Now, we're ready, we have money. He shows up and offers to do it for us. He can plan it all and take care of it. He drew this. This was the original drawing, the etching. It's over in the History Center right now for the exhibit. It'll be coming back soon. But anyway, that was the original way it was going to look. It's pretty much close to that. They wanted it was going to be brick. There's a basement under it. And they were going to paint it white because it wouldn't match the cottage. That didn't quite make it, I guess. But what he did, he would sit down with this committee of women, and they talked through everything. Here you have this man who's world-renowned. He's sitting down with these women from Saugatuck, and they're figuring out how they're going to do it. And he had suggestions, and they had suggestions, and it was a wonderful thing to read about. What they did, they got the basement in, and then they put in a, what's that called, guys?
Cornerstone.
Thank you, a cornerstone, yeah. Now, can you find it in that picture? Nobody's found it. They've never found it. But anyway, it was all a beautiful ceremony, of course, and May Francis was in charge, so it was very nice. And she stuffed it full of business people things, all the stuff, all the whole community into that box. And they sealed it up. She scratched SWC in it, and nobody's seen it since. Oh, that's done. Oh, I should tell you, though, another little cute village thing. The superintendent who did the building and everything, his wife was a member of the Women's Club. And the main builder was a member, too. And so, of course, at this cornerstone and all the dedication, all the women were there, and all the builders were there, because they're all married, everybody, Yeah. But it's really neat to see how they did it. That's another picture of Tallmadge, who, the women, I tell you, when that happened, I read the tribute to him done by the Women's Club, and it was really very touching. So that's why I put him back up there, because he was a really important man in the whole scheme of things. They got the building built, but they would not use it because they hadn't paid for it. They ended up getting a mortgage, and they refused to use it until everything was paid off. And so they met in the front in the Breuckman house. But I thought, isn't that something? They had a glorious burning of the mortgage, a big party, and all the same people, the wives and they were all there and celebrating. And they opened the door. And then they had to do the rest of the stuff inside. I mean, they were down to cement floors, and you can see how it's changed in that time. Oh, Sally, look at here. I told Sally, that's Sally after I finally left the other day. She was celebrating. This is Chris Yoder, if you don't know him. Yay. Chris, are you here? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see you come in. You can see who's working my computer, can't you? Yeah, in my kitchen. I could not have done it without him. This is from the program committee, almost as good as the commandments. Here's to the women of the Saugatuck Women's Club. God bless them still. We wish to be just and generous and omit all ill will. If the program suits you, it is all we ask. If not, then next time you'll kindly accept the task. Signed by the program committee. Thank you.